was thinking about cities as complex systems from the point of view of coding and evolution. I will soon explain. So, first of all, about abstract principles and codes and how they relate to complexity. Throughout history, we know that the development of the built environment was subjected to abstract principles and codes. We know, for example, Basim Hakim's work tells us about Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cities that had a set of rules or codes that were eventually written, but they were most of the time tacit and not really binding. Nevertheless, they were very binding in terms of cultural stipulations that they posed on urbanism. So we know that Middle Eastern cities all around the Mediterraneans obeyed certain rules, and this is why sometimes when we walk in an Arab village in Israel, we feel that we are actually visiting an Italian village, and they are all really the same, taking care of privacy, of mutual uses of the public spaces, etc. And this dynamics created the very specific yet very unique pattern of Middle Eastern cities. For example, we're looking at a Libyan city from above, but try to take a look on Fez in Morocco, on old city of Jerusalem from above, of the remains or the old pictures of Jaffa before it was destroyed. They are all very similar in terms of their obedience to bottom-up emergence of abstract principles and code. However, this is not just a case of Middle Eastern cities. For example, Wendy Ashmore's research of Mayan cities in Middle and Southern America reveals a special patterning. This is how she names this. She couldn't find any writings that prove that there were rules. Nevertheless, when she analyzes the built environment, it is nevertheless very clear that there were abstract principles and codes that created this spatial patterning in Mayan cities. And it's not just ancient cities that were obeying rules. For example, we know Paris, modern Paris, it was so radically changed in a top to bottom manner by Haussmann's plans. In 20 years they tore the city apart according to a top to bottom planning, and the city was radically changed. Nevertheless, we also know that in the 19th century, immediately with and after this massive rude intervention, the city developed a certain Parisian style, and each building was not exactly the same, but they all followed the same rules and principles, so much that urbanist and researcher Peter Hall said that, and even this one it's a caricature from 1840 journal of Parisian journal, showing us that the buildings, although not meant to or not ordered to, had a certain section in which upper classes used the second and third floor, and lower classes were at the concierge and then under the roof. And this pattern was emerging, although it was not ordered. Nevertheless, it was typifying Paris throughout the second half of the 20th century. So we know about these and much more evidence about patterning in urbanism. Logan describes planning codes in German cities since the medieval period and afterwards. Emily Talen tells us about non-mapped and again abstract principles affecting the growth of many other European cities in Britain, Netherlands, Germany, and many others. Just want to say that as we know it, this tremendous evolution of codes, of abstract principles that direct the development of cities, seized at once with the application of top to bottom modernist planning ideas. When we have a land use map, just an example over here, plan-led planning that is the rule. It's not abstract, it's really concrete. It is not relating to the all reach relations between elements, but it is directing specifically what and where should people build and use elements. So as Stefano Moroni states, these end-state control devices are aiming at ordering the action of private people and not simply regulating them. And this is the main change that modern urban theory created. Instead of or regulating, directing, giving abstract principles, modern planning theory attempts at directing exactly what to build and where to build it, and we have altogether lost this tendency to use abstract codes and principles. As we know it, urbanists are completely aware to the different sorts of built environments created by abstract or plan-led regulation. For example, Christopher Alexander stating that wanting to call these cities, which have arising more or less spontaneously over many years, natural cities. And he defines them from the artificial cities that are top to bottom planned and built by modern urbanism. He names this quality of natural cities a quality without a name. Cannot be made, it cannot be generated, but only indirectly by the actions of people. And I just want a little bit to challenge this saying that it is indirectly and that we cannot control it. Because, for example, Alexander continues and says that the very existence of abstract codes and principles is enough to his saying. He says that within the framework of common language, what I just called abstract principles and codes, a million of individuals act on buildings will together generate a town which is alive, a whole, unpredictable, without control. I stress it, but it was not stressed, it was not in bold initially, but nevertheless it was said. The same he said in elsewhere. It is a process which brings out order out of nothing but ourselves. It cannot be attained, but it will happen of its own accord if we only let it. So this is one thing that I want to a little bit challenge, because I totally accept this view, but I don't accept that it is without control. I think that there is a certain mechanism that creates these places. And again, I turn to literature and I look at Jamal Akbar's beautiful book from 1988, called Crisis in the Built Environment. Again, dealing with the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern, mostly Muslim cultural abstract rules that created the built environment. And Jamal Akbar is talking about a mechanism that underlines the application of abstract rules. He tells about a mechanism of people negotiating new development, new building among themselves. The abstract rules are at the backdrop of these negotiations, of these direct agreements. Nevertheless, they agree. And the mechanism that is creating these fabulous urban environments is actually a mechanism of direct negotiation between the builders, the people that are responsible to live and to occupy and to live by side of the new elements. And the crisis of the built environment, as the title of his book, is actually created when the replacement of direct negotiation occurs with the direct ordering of the central plan. When we look at the outline plan that is replacing the abstract rules, then we understand that it is not just the loss of the rules, it is the loss of all the knowledge and the wisdom and the gradual development of the codes themselves and the built environment, and the gradual adjustment of the built environment to changing circumstances, changing culture, technology and values, by a direct involvement and regulation of the state, of the planner, of the modern planner. So I will not talk about it at length now because of the short time, but nevertheless I do think that this direct involvement and direct negotiation and direct agreement between parties is a very necessary and a fundamental issue in the development of a very good and alive built environment. Okay, so just wanted to say that we found in research that this dynamic of direct negotiation also existed, for example, in Paris. I will not go too long about it, but it did exist when people had to negotiate the height of the floors in order to create places that are working very good together. And just to say that in order to create those placemaking through the lens of complex systems and to link this complexity science to urbanism, we need to have all three, if you want, parts. First of all, to have the abstract principles and code that are driven first and foremost from sociocultural values and norms. We need to have the direct involvement of stakeholders. It should be supervised, it should be directed. I'm not, again, going into details, but I offered elsewhere to adopt a semi-judiciary system to control this direct involvement of stakeholders, because we are not living in small cities that everybody share the same culture, but we need some means for direct negotiation. Nevertheless, I think it's very fundamental and crucial. And of course, we need to have the means for gradual change and evolution of both codes and the built environment. So to my view, this is the essential link between placemaking and urban development. I'm glad to say that we are looking at a quiet revolution in which abstract codes and principles are much more evident in current urban theory and urban planning as means, and both as means and practice, and as means of theory. I think it's a start, but I think that all three are necessary to be evident and participate in the creation of places. So just to thank you for your listening and your attendance, and to wish us all a very interesting day. Thank you.